Right, so Israel and Syria are now de facto at war with each other. The completely unprovoked and ongoing assault by Israel on Syria has come to a head, whether unelected President Ahmed Al Sharaa wanted it to or not. His attempts to make diplomatic ties with Israel have gone completely ignored. His deposing of Bashar Al Assad and his regime served Israel's purpose and nothing more. Yet now Israel's useful man in Syria is of no more use to them, and Al Sharaa should focus on the needs of his people and not ties to Netanyahu. Israel's excuse is one of national security, but Syria have been no threat to them, and for as much as Al Sharaa has been rightly criticised for sitting on his hands all of this time, that also goes in his favour, when no aggression on Syria's part can be pointed to justify Israel's stance. If Israel is so afraid of all of its neighbours, though, that it needs buffer zones in Gaza and southern Lebanon and now southern Syria, perhaps it ought to consider making said zones in its own territory instead of invading the territory of others, though. Well, now there's been a shift, not just in Syria, but support from other states as well, meaning we could be verging on the prospect of a much wider war before very much longer. Right, so it's hardly news to say that the Middle East has been plagued by conflict and instability. It's a bit of an understatement, really. Pretty much solely due to Israel since they began their genocide following the night of October 7th, 2023, and yet Israel are managing to create even more of that now, once again on the brink of a major confrontation. Syria, a nation already devastated by over a decade of civil war, piecing itself together under a new administration formed by a bunch of formerly Israeli-backed Al-Qaeda cast-offs, now finds itself at war with Israel, their usefulness clearly now having expired, pretty senseless when diplomatic ties are surely more preferable. I dare say Syria's condemnation of the genocide in Gaza having not helped matters, so the fact they aren't white likely has just as much to do with it in my view. This latest escalation is not merely a continuation of the historical animosity between the two nations that could have ended with Assad's fall, though, but a stark reminder of Israel's expansionist policies in the region. The Greater Israel ideology, still in many people's minds, is Israel's ultimate aim here. Israel's recent military actions in southern Syria, framed as necessary for their national security, are just part of a broader pattern of aggression that includes its ongoing genocide in Gaza, its oppressive measures in the West Bank, essentially a second Gaza as that is turning out to be, and its invasion of southern Lebanon. The ceasefire now over, and Israel is still very much there and very much still attacking. These actions that Israel has attempted to justify, though, under the guise of creating buffer zones, are nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to assert dominance and seize territory from neighbouring states. As far as Syria itself goes, though, their unelected president, Ahmed Al Sharaa, has been widely condemned and criticised, not least by his own people for failing to respond to the Israeli threat, prioritising attempts at making diplomatic overtures towards Netanyahu that have yielded zero results. But the Syrian people, however, they have not remained silent. Protests against the Israeli occupation of southern Syria have erupted across the south of the country, demanding action from their government, their new government, to push these invaders back. Israel's recent military strikes on southern Syria and eastern Lebanon in recent days have marked a dangerous escalation in its long-standing policy of regional domination to make itself feel safer, a mindset that keeps the Middle East in a permanent state of instability, but is Israel, so they always get a free pass. The Israeli army have launched violent strikes on southern Syria particularly, targeting military positions and civilian infrastructure alike because they don't discriminate. Unprovoked attacks as these have been since Al Sharaa took over in Syria, all part of Israel's broader strategy to create these buffer zones in neighbouring countries under the pretext of its national security. But blow to anyone else's security. It's the message sent out. Blow to anyone else's right to defend themselves. What Israel says goes, and their Western allies back them and nod like pliant puppies ever since, every single time. The timing of these strikes is particularly concerning, though, with so much warring and so much atrocity being instigated by Israel elsewhere already. Syria is still sorting itself out after the end of the civil war there and the fall of the Assad regime. Israel, having bombed much of the remaining militaria left over from Assad's time in charge, is therefore in no position to defend itself against well-equipped, Western-backed militaries like Israel's. Israel's bombing campaign has now been targeting areas not just south of Damascus, in those areas of Quneitra, Dara and Suwaida, where Israel have now ordered the demilitarization of those areas and barred Syrian military access to their own territory. But literally, they're outside the city walls doing it now, further destabilizing a nation that's already struggling to rebuild and struggling with a sense of self sense of what it's going to look like given the new leadership, and the debate about how long they will be in charge before they end up holding elections and moving forward. Israel's actions, therefore, can only be seen as aggressive and in no way defensive, aimed at weakening Syria's ability to resist Israeli influence in the region, keeping the paranoid Netanyahu government in a position where they feel safer, knowing all of their neighbours are essentially in military and economic ruins. It is a pariah state like nowhere else. Another of Israel's justifications for these ongoing strikes now, though, increasingly leading towards war, is that they are necessary to prevent Iranian and Hezbollah influence in Syria as well, which is completely disingenuous. Al Sharaa has made it clear from the get-go that he wanted nothing to do with either Hezbollah nor Iran. He wanted to be mates with Israel. And one of the reasons Al Sharaa was backed to depose Assad was to interrupt those supply routes that went through Syria between Iran and Hezbollah. And this has been done to greater or lesser extent, both by Syria itself now and by Israel, both notably targeting tracks and routes through leading into Lebanon from the east. But with Israel now attacking Syria itself, though, it's easy to see how Al Sharaa might have picked the wrong side now. Nevertheless, these strikes on Syria have drawn widespread criticism from across the Middle East and beyond, including those states that have not had the friendliest of starts with the new Syrian administration. Israel getting this far, though, isn't solely down to them, however. Ahmed Al Sharaa must also bear some responsibility for this current crisis, because since he assumed power, all he has done is focus on trying to build up diplomatic ties he thought his HTS faction already had with Israel, apparently blissfully unaware that he was basically being used, hoping to achieve lasting peace and a good relations with Netanyahu after he's done their bidding, though therefore has been largely futile. This approach has been naive at best and negligent at worst, given Israel's responses. Instead, Israel have used the time where Al Sharaa has been making overtures to them as an opportunity to further its military objectives. Al Sharaa's failure to adequately address the Israeli threat has left Syria vulnerable to the point Israel is now attacking on the capital's doorstep, and yet despite that, Israel's strikes on Syrian positions, villages, water sources and further Syrian territory have still largely gone unanswered, emboldening Israel to just keep on going. What's to stop them? Well, the Syrian people might have something to say about it, mightn't they? They are already sick and tired from years of conflict, their civil war, having taken to the streets now to protest their new government's inaction, calling Netanyahu a pig in the streets of Dara government, amongst other scenes. But these protests, which have spread across the south of the country, together with calls for their new leader to do something and get his act together, the Druze in Suwaida constructing their own militia now, and even talking of seceding away from Syria entirely over matters now, are a clear indication of the public's frustration with Al Sharaa's incessant inaction. Well, pressure like this will eventually get to anyone, and finally Al Sharaa has come out and condemned Israel's actions. In a recent statement, he described these strikes as a blatant violation of international law and has called for the United Nations to intervene. He's done this before, though, haven't he? Sent the UN a strongly worded letter, is what he'd done previously, for all the difference that ended up making. While another public condemnation of Israel might be something, though, might be a bit of a step in the right direction, it's a very baby step, and it just feels very insufficient with 3 of your governorates now under Israeli occupation in effect. It is too little too late, surely. But Syria's inability, or Al Sharaa's unwillingness to defend itself, has allowed Israel to establish a de facto occupation across southern Syria, and there can be no peace under such circumstances as that. They already had the Golan Heights. How much more of a buffer did they need? But if you're not sure, here's the map of Greater Israel. It might hold a little bit of a clue for you. Anyway, other states neighbouring Syria have not been silent on this issue either. Countries across the Middle East have condemned Israel's actions and expressed solidarity with Syria for what they are going through. Saudi Arabia and Egypt, 2 of the region's most influential nations, have been particularly vocal in their criticism. Saudi Arabia has accused Israel of seeking to destabilise Syria through its airstrikes, whilst Egypt called for an immediate cessation of the hostilities, overseers of the Gaza ceasefire as they are, let's not forget. And Turkey, who are aiding Al Sharaa in the writing of the new Syrian constitution, as well as fighting in the north of Syria against the Kurds, doing their own share of destabilising Syria, it should be noted, have also condemned Israel's actions, with its foreign minister describing the occupation of southern Syria as part of Israel's expansionist agenda. Jordan, which shares a border with Syria, has also expressed concern over the escalating conflict. King Abdullah II of Jordan reportedly told President Al Sharaa that he condemns the Israeli attacks and called for a diplomatic solution to the crisis, which, given Israel's control of the Yarmouk River basin in southern Syria, might be as brave as Jordan feels at this point, given that water source accounts for 40% of Jordan's water supply as well as some of Syria's. Iran has been a long-time ally of Syria up until the fall of Assad, as Al Sharaa has wanted nothing to do with them, preferring Israel, though some talks between the two states have apparently been going on. Iran has a long track record of being particularly outspoken in its criticism of Israel, I think it's fair to say, and now has been no different, with Iran having also called on the United Nations to intervene and hold Israel accountable for its aggression. So this call for international action reflects the growing recognition that the conflict in Syria is not just a regional issue, but has the potential to spread to be a global one. The United Nations, however, has its hands permanently tied by the US on the Security Council, and now is no different, rendering them seemingly unable to take any meaningful action, still tantamount to being as useful as a chocolate teapot in calming down an overheating Middle East. Without any effective diplomatic solution here, without intervention, with Israel carrying on its attacks in Syria with impunity, the two nations are essentially at war now, even if only one side is currently doing the fighting. Syria doesn't have much military power now. Ending the civil war took a toll. Israel made sure to destroy as much military gear as possible in the immediate aftermath of Assad's fall. So they've left Syria exactly where they wanted them. And to get out of it, Syria really does need some friends, and to accept the fact Israel, under Netanyahu, is never going to be their friend. It's good that there is support for them being voiced by their neighbouring states, but will it translate into a force to expel Israel from Syria with no diplomatic solution readily apparent at this point in time? Certainly nowhere in sight. Well, that all remains to be seen. But the further Israel is allowed to spread and invade in Syria, the more of a problem they're going to become for more states going forwards, and a bigger global catastrophe that's going to make. What is certainly not helping Syria right now is that Al Sharaa's forces seem more fixated on implementing their version of religious extremism on minorities than worrying about Israel, making themselves unpopular domestically as much as they are militarily for the people of Syria. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content on the channel, as well as supporting the work done here, bringing you the news that the mainstream won't, which is enormously appreciated, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.